Good afternoon and welcome to the Mtech Access Words of Wisdom webinar. I'm Tom Clarke and it's great to be back with the opportunity to speak to another prominent colleague from the NHS to examine yet another dimension of care and the ever more complex integration puzzle. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Helen Ray, the Chief Executive of the North East Ambulance Service NHS Trust. Helen joined NEAS in 2019, having been Chief Operating Officer at Northumbria Healthcare, overseeing urgent and emergency care, medicine, child health and community services, with board level responsibility for emergency planning and preparedness. She's previously held senior executive roles across acute and community services in North Cumbria and South Tyneside. She's also a trained nurse and has held her professional registration for 30 years. So hopefully I've covered everything there for you, Helen. It's a very, very comprehensive CV you've got. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. For everyone that doesn't know you, for everyone that's listening in at home, can you just briefly summarise your organisation, your role that you're in at the moment?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Tom, for having me today. It's a real pleasure. So as Tom said, I'm the Chief Executive of the North East Ambulance Service. We're an organisation that covers about 3,500 square miles with over 50 ambulance stations. I've been the Chief Executive here for just over a year and a half. Ambulance sector very different as part of the overall NHS structure. A really valuable interface organisation right across that whole integrated care system, which I know Tom and I will talk about a little bit. And Tom's given you my background, so probably nothing else I need to say in terms of introduction.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Helen. So obviously you're currently at the Ambulance Trust. Many of our listeners probably have a specific, possibly limited view of what ambulance trusts do, formed by what we see on TV, probably a lot of it casualty and things like that. We've had conversations about kind of the breadth of what you actually do at the trust. Can you just outline kind of the breadth of work that goes on, a few interesting facts maybe about the trust, just to kind of dispel some of those myths about what an ambulance trust is?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect it's not casualty that people watch now to get their understanding of what an ambulance trust does. There's a programs that Inside the Ambulance, where there is a fly on the wall documentary around the paramedics and the work that they do. But that is only about a third of our organisation. So we, most ambulance trusts, but not all, are broken down into these three areas. So firstly, we have urgent emergency care, the thing that people traditionally think about when they're talking about the ambulance service. So, you know, the production of an ambulance at, you know, the scene of an incident, and usually people think about the transport of someone to hospital as a direct result of that. What I would say in that vein is that probably only about 40% of the cases we attend ever see the inside of a hospital. Our paramedics will see and treat the majority of the cases that they are called to at the scene. And it's not the glamorous sort of, oh, we're dealing with all of these high incidents on a daily basis. Actually, the majority of the time we spend looking after patients with chronic disease and working with our partners for how we safely keep those patients at home. We have a hazardous area response team as part of that, and they do the very high level attend the very high level incidents because we border the northeast coast right from the Scottish border down to the Yorkshire border. We do see quite a lot of work with our Coast Guard colleagues. We work closely with the fire services, you might expect, and closely with the police in that blue light arena that everyone is familiar with. We also run a very big scheduled care service, which in its easiest sense is about, you know, the transport of patients to and from hospital for booked appointments, and that can be anything from acutely unwell patients for dialysis, through to the elderly who are going for their annual checkup with their geriatrician, and everything in between that. And then lastly, and not all ambulance trusts in England or in the UK provide this, we have an emergency operations centre that combines NHS 111, which is a very familiar number now, I think, for people out in the community, and of course the 999 service. And we have an integral service for our call handlers built within there, and follow a pathways construct for that. And then obviously we have a very small, really, support infrastructure for that. So in context, we have almost 3,000 staff in NIAS. I said we cover 3,500 square miles, and we have an annual turnover of about 180 million, which in the context of the NHS places us as a small trust, a small foundation trust.
Yeah, wow, so huge amounts, and I mean, we're going to get into it as we talk, but there's very few areas of care that you don't touch on as a trust in one way or another. What does your workforce look like? You've touched on all those different areas, and again, it's not just paramedics, is it? Who else works for the trust?
Yeah, so we have a real multidisciplinary workforce. We employ, of course, paramedics. We have associates to those areas, which would, in hospital terms, I suppose, be the equivalent of healthcare assistants with enhanced skills. So the ambulances might be dispatched with a paramedic and an assistant within the ambulance, so two-person crew. We have a number of different nursing roles. So Macmillan nurses work with us. We have falls specialist nurses, and we have advanced practitioners who work within our contact centre to try and signpost the patient who's on the telephone to us to the right structure. We have doctors, we have pharmacists also work within our organisation, and obviously we've got an infrastructure that involves HR functions, IT. Digital is extraordinarily important to us, and I think we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But we have a very rich and diverse workforce, not just a traditional workforce, and that is important for the future as we think about the way the services are being constructed, and we move towards a much more blended approach rather than traditional boundaries. So when I was a nurse, you've mentioned that just earlier, Tom, it would be unheard of for the nurse to be allowed to get the patient out of bed because that was the physiotherapist's job. Now we've moved much more away from that sort of boundary and professional roles to a blended approach, and we're keen as an ambulance sector to move that even further for us, so that we play a different role in supporting the system as best we can.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it's a shame we've only got an hour, because already there's huge amounts that I want to talk to you about. Just you touched on a couple of things there in terms of the things that you do as a trust, the different people you've got. How much of a bearing on patient flows around a system does your trust have?
So yeah, so I would say, and you might be better asking an acute chief executive what they think, but I would say that we are really the lifeblood of that. So in the Northeast, we are the only organisation that interfaces with every other organisation. So the mental health trusts come close to that, but the ambulance trust is the only pan-regional service, and it is in most areas. You'll be aware, I'm sure, and I'm sure that those who are listening are aware, there are 13 ambulance trusts within the UK, 10 of which are in England, and we work collectively as an integrated care community across those 10, because within those 10 we reach, well, within the 13 we reach everywhere, including Ireland and Scotland, but within the 10 we reach all of the organisations in England, and that is powerful. And there is more that we could do I think, to support the system in a more productive way. If there was a different angle or a different understanding of just what the ambulance service does. So I see us as the veins and arteries of the service.
That's a nice analogy. I like that. So what are your current pressures, and how have those evolved since the beginning of the pandemic?
Gosh, I mean, the pressures are significant right across the system. I took up this post in September, just before the March pandemic. I had a few months in, the honeymoon period, coming in as a chief exec. I went on holiday, and I was on holiday in Australia. I was very lucky to have friends. And this thing called COVID was being talked about when I was on holiday in February, and there was some great amusement about the buying of toilet paper. I'm sure everybody will remember. And I recall being in Perth and seeing a sign that said free toilet roll with every cup of coffee bought. And it was a little bit of a giggle, wasn't it? At the time, we all thought this is going to blow over like the flu. And then I got a call, which is very unusual. My team are really good at trying to give you a break. And they said, "Oh, Helen, we've been asked to go to York to pick up 2 patients that are COVID positive." So that was at the back end of the beginning of February. And from then, the pressure has ebbed and flowed, I think. So it hasn't been hugely consistent. I think it's been very consistent for hospitals. But for the ambulance sector, it's ebbed and flowed somewhat because of the down tooling of services for planned care. Therefore, we had much greater additional capacity in our scheduled care services that we could redeploy to manage those peaks and activities. But since we've started to have much greater success with the pandemic, with the vaccine through the pandemic, then we have settled at an activity level that is circa 30% greater than when we went into the pandemic. That is very problematic because we are settling on that 30% at this moment in time. Of course, that is very well funded through the Secretary of State for Health and the COVID fund that has been set up. We know that that continues to exist for the first half of this year, but then as we move into the second half, that will change. So the challenges to maintain that level of activity at that 30% growth are huge. So maximising efficiencies is a big target area for us at this moment. The maximisation, as I said earlier, of the digital tech platforms that we waited for years and said, "Oh, these aren't possible," then made happen overnight because we had to, needs must, and all of that. So the big pressures for us are, how do we, if this is to be the new normal in activity levels, how do we A, have sufficient capacity to do that, but B, manage that capacity in the most efficient and effective way? So very, very great pressures. We aren't alone in that, but it is different, I think, for the ambulance sector. It is less visible for us in some ways.
In terms of that workload, is the case mix similar to what it was 18 months ago? It's just more of each type, or are you seeing particular areas?
Yeah. So as we're emerging, what we are seeing is our patients coming forward who have sat on their symptoms, is probably a good way to put it, and therefore those symptoms are more acute than perhaps they would have been if they had sought help earlier. There's been a real fear for people in relation to seeking that support and advice or guidance. And we have, with our frontline crews, dealt with many patients where actually acute intervention in a hospital would be the advice that we would give them, who do not wish to go to the hospital because they are worried, because they're worried about, will I contract COVID in hospital, although that has reduced hugely. That was a real fear at the start of the pandemic, and also worried because, of course, they can't see their loved ones in hospital at this moment in time. Those restrictions are still in place, and some of our patients know that they are close to end of life and therefore have elected to remain at home. So there's a different patient behaviour that is driving some of that level. And certainly at this moment in time, although whether this will remain or not in the modelling, we are unclear, there is definitely a lift in the acuity of the patients that we are seeing. We suspect that is linked to late presentation rather than anything else, and a huge surge in mental health. And we are seeing now, just in the last 3 weeks, a very big surge in paediatrics.
Yeah, absolutely. The meeting I was in before this, we were talking about the surge in paediatrics in A&E, but just that idea about the later presentation or greater acuity. So a lot of our audience, in the course of their business, they are dealing with long-term conditions, so be it COPD, diabetes. So as an example, that hypoglycemic attack or that COPD exacerbation, something like that, where your teams are being called out to those, are they able to manage them in the community? You're talking about people wanting to stay at home. Are they having have they still got that proportion that they're dealing with at home, or are they bringing more into hospital?
Yeah, we do have a proportion who we can manage at home, who are wired into some of the great tech that allows them to self-manage, self-testing, that ability to make sure your O2 levels are as stable as they need to be, that knowledge that you have background emergency meds that you can tap into should your temperature escalate, etc. All of which is driven by some really good home care devices. But we still do have to take a significant number to hospital who potentially we feel could be left at home for treatment, because that intervention is not available in a sufficiently timely. It's not sufficiently timely at this moment in time, and we also haven't. I don't think the NHS has really exploited that ability to for patients to self-manage at home. We almost don't trust the patients. We don't treat them as their own expert. We're getting better at it, I think. In my very long career in the NHS of 38 years, it's come a long way. But there's still an untapped opportunity there, I think, for that self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of your workforce, you touched on the breadth of people that you've got working for you. That ability to help people stay at home, are you looking to make more tools, either sort of physical tools or skills-based tools, available to your team so that they're better able to manage patients closer to home?
Yeah, so we would really love to do that. Our problem as an ambulance service is that you need time on scene with the patient to be able to address that and set that up in the right way. Our setup in terms of our capacity and demand probably allows us a maximum time on scene if we are to hit all of the other standards and see all of the other patients in a timely manner. It allows us time on scene of about 35 minutes, which is woefully inadequate for the setup that we are talking about. The integrated care system, I think, in dealing with health inequalities, as we move into that new frame, must grasp that opportunity to level up that playing field, give those patients who can manage and want to manage at home the skills and the devices that are available to allow them to do that, because that will allow, for my mindset, us to focus on the recovery, the cancer recovery, the elective recovery, and make sure that the chronic disease, which is clearly, as you know, as the listeners will all know, associated with a real difference in the age demographic of the population, to be able to manage in a much more constructive way. And I don't just mean individuals in their own home, but actually how do we really embrace and engage with the care home sector within that, who have a very transient workforce and would benefit much more from that standardization of approach that could be brought to bear through these different routes.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to get stuck into the integration bit in a couple of minutes. And what are your priorities as a trust at the moment? You touched on a few important things.
Yeah. So actually, we've just rewritten our 5-year strategy. So great timing to ask me that question. So we,
all in preparation for this, I'm sure.
That's right. We just knocked it up in the last week. We have developed what we call our P's and Q's. So we wanted something that was going to be quite snappy. So the first of our P's, our priorities will be around performance and making sure that we have the workforce and the skill set to be able to lift our performance, which is absolutely not where it needs to be at this moment in time and needs some work. Our second ambition is built on people. We have a very tired and very fractious and very broken, in some cases, workforce. We're seeing a real lift in the numbers of our staff who are absent due to mental health conditions. We are seeing in hospitals PTSD post management of the pandemic, so a really big piece of work linked to obviously the work that Praying RSR is doing as the lead people officer for NHS. So linking all that to the people, our staff. And then partnership as part of the integrated care system will be really important. We would like to be the single point of contact for all urgent care appointments. So patients come through multiple areas. It is very confusing for them. It is inefficient. They will try 3 or 4 different areas. So I can't get through to my GP. I'll try 111. Oh, I can't get through to 111 because it's so extraordinarily busy. I feel a bit sicker than I did this morning. I'm going to ring 999. So actually, if we combine the whole efforts of all of those, we'd give a far greater service to patients. So that single point of access in our partnership approach and supporting the system to keep those patients at home who can be at home. And underpinning all of that, of course, is our Q, which is quality and safety. So we have to be able to do that in a safe and quality-driven way, and keeping the patient, the patient is king in my mind, and you have to keep the king on the throne, and so we look at the patient the whole time at the centre of that. So we are ambitious to do more for the system, but we need to be able to fix our performance to be able to start to grow and innovate in a much more seamless and much more productive way, coming back to being that vein and artery that connects the pieces of the very wide jigsaw that is the Northeast.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that performance piece, because I think that the idea of how performance is measured now and how it might be in the future is one thing I want to come back to. So before we do that, we saw last week the publication of the ICS design framework, which is giving a bit more detail on how the systems might evolve, how they might work in practice. Obviously, you've just alluded to you being a big part of that. So what are your reflections on that framework?
Yeah, so I think the design framework is okay. It's very permissive, which I think the chief execs, certainly in our patch, were really keen to see, because you can't have a one size fits all. It doesn't really tell us in great detail yet how some of those key functions are actually going to look. So you know, people will know that the CCGs, the current commissioning functions, will be dissolved in favour of a new function for commissioning that will sit primarily at ICS level, but then with some devolvement into different areas. And everybody, of course, goes straight to the core of that bit, which is the money, because it's the money kind of governs everything that we're doing. So getting those structures right on how that money is distributed to fulfill the levelling up agenda, to think about what the public health requirements are, to think about adult social care as well as health within there. The framework does give that permissive approach to that. Personally, for me, the devil's going to be really in the detail of that. So where does a regional service like ourselves sit, as opposed to say Newcastle hospitals, which actually have a very contained boundary, but actually are a, you know, £1 billion organisation. So how do we have a voice as a £200 million organisation, the same as the £1 billion behemoths that are the big acute providers? So you know, a little bit more devil in the detail with that. I think it is very important that place-based services take primacy within this, and that we don't just build in a repeat of the structure. So there is some risk, I think, that ICSs could start to replicate what used to be the old strategic health authorities, and that we just build in tiers of governance that actually make change or transformation very turgid. So we've got an opportunity to become much more fleet-footed, and we've got to grasp that through the permissiveness of the design framework as it stands. So building that up in the very best way, so that, you know, we are engaged, we continue to be engaged with local authorities. And, you know, local authorities are nervous about this big change. We're trying to push this change. We will push this change into legislation by the 1st of April next year. The last time we made a change of this magnitude in the NHS, we took about 3 years to do it, but we're doing this in a year. And so, you know, you do worry about the scale and the pace, being able to get this right. So as chief execs, myself and all of the other chief execs in our patch, this is the major focus of attention for us over the next 3 to 4 months, so that we're all comfortable to work in that framework in the very best way that we can. It's a great opportunity, I think. It's a great opportunity for very quick improvement if it is managed in the right way. It could make a significant difference to the way we manage our health infrastructure, but we can't lose bringing our local authority colleagues and, you know, our voluntary sector, our hospices, all of those great pieces of work that sit almost on the peripheries. If we don't take the chance to wrap those in now, we'll have lost something along the way. So place-based is primacy, getting the structures right, making sure the money flows, so that we can have the levelling up on the public health agenda that is really needed.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a really nice summary there, I think. And one thing that we've heard with most, if not all, of the publications over the last 6 months or so, has been that thing around the details lacking. It seems to be a bit of a common theme, and obviously everything evolves a little bit. From your perspective locally, you talk about conversations with your other chief execs. I suppose finance is the one bit where you do need the detail, but aside from that, how much of the detail do you need, and how much are you doing it almost bottom up, as it were, and having those conversations and determining, anyway, this is how we want to do it, and then we'll make sure that we fit into the framework at the end point?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. I was on a meeting this morning actually with So Liam Donaldson, who is our chair, the chief executives had the opportunity to talk to Liam just about that subject just this morning. And for our ICS, we've been in shadow form really for almost 2 years. So we've had an integrated care system working really quite well for that period of time. The system is built on, it's not built on the governance, it's built on the trust that the people have between them. So if you look for the really great practice in the country, I would say if you look at Yorkshire and what they have done through people like Rob Webster, Tim Riordan, they have built an infrastructure that works really well, and they've built that from the bottom. They've recognised they've recognised the influencers, they've recognised where the power base sits, and that is all grown up. You know, so let's have a grown-up conversation about actually, you know, these people here over here hold a fair chunk of that power. So let's recognise that and let's use it to our best advantage. In the northeast, so we have the northeastern Cumbria, and I haven't touched on Cumbria because for my service, that for ambulances, that's provided by Northwest Ambulance Service. But the interface with Cumbria is important. So you're only as good as the worst provider or the worst performance. I wouldn't say the worst provider. So where you have failing organisations, you have to fix that. If you're having a grown-up conversation, you have to fix that. And some of that will be at the expense of something you might want to do that puts a cherry on your cake when actually the other two organisations' cakes are still in the mixing bowl, they haven't got into the oven yet. So, you know, let's get them into the oven, get them to the stage where they can get the icing on before we start giving you your cherries and sprinkles. And those are really powerful conversations that happen well in our ICS because we trust each other. And we feel we can out those difficult conversations in a very productive way. And we have to continue to be able to do that if we aren't to see some organisations actually fail further and others flourish further.
Yeah, fantastic. So you mentioned there about the trust between the organisations. In the Northeast, there's historically very strong performing organisations up there. There's also a really good track record of innovation from the Northeast. Do you think that gives confidence as well that even though there's challenges, inevitably you are starting from a strong position?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you know, the regional team obviously have to be very happy with the direction of travel that we are taking this in, and they were part of the discussion that I mentioned briefly from this morning. So it does help to have to be seen as a bit of a banker. So, you know, we are seen as a successful, well-rounded, well-structured organisation. We have a very strong provider collaborative now that came together in September to manage the pandemic, but now is moving on to think through what do our core clinical pathways look like. Unlike most ICSs, all providers are part of that provider collaborative. All acute providers at this time are part of that provider collaborative. And that allows us to have conversations once and to make agreements once and to kind of, you know, influence the direction of travel. You know, it doesn't do us any harm to have some very strong players who play into some the big central fields in that area. So we have that reach both in and out. That is that vertical and horizontal approach. That is the thing that I think binds us together well.
Yeah, and that the term provider collaboratives is one that is causing a bit of mystery out there as to what they are and how they look. You just touched on the fact that you've had one up and running for a little while now. How does it look and what does it do? If you could sort of briefly summarise, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
lots that you're.
So its construct is it's all of the acute providers, so Ambulance Trust, Mental Health Trust, and the acute hospital trusts. The things that we focus on are where we can do things well and once. So a good example of that would be we came together to talk about breast services and how disparate the breast services were across our patch. We all agreed they were disparate. We collectively said what would good look like. And whilst that meant some give and get from organisations that provided those services, keeping the patient at the forefront of that, we actually very rapidly just agreed to change. So that's one great example of what a collaborative will do. We have all joined together through that collaborative to think through the elective recovery programme. So that included ourselves as ambulance provider and the mental health trust. So it could very easily simply have focused on the acutes and what their recovery needed to look like, but we've had a much greater rounded view. We're able to commission pieces of work through our broad teams, particularly through our excellent network of chief operating officers who, you know, as I say this tongue in cheek because I was a chief operating officer for a very long time. The chief operating officers, they're the people who run the show on our behalf as chief execs. They are a very, very valuable asset and a very strong team. So, you know, that ability just to come together to fix some things that actually have been on the stocks for a long time. And then now we are focused on the forward view. And what that might look like, including things like, you know, what does the sustainability agenda look like? How do we get to net zero on our carbon footprints? All of those big important things that actually we would do better together than we will as individual organisations.
And that decision-making process in terms of how that goes, who brings things to that forum and how is that decision made about what to pursue?
Yeah, so we can all, anybody can bring things to the forum, and it, you know, to date, because we've only been really formed since September, to date we have really focused on urgent priorities that have focused in on COVID, Tom, is the honest reality at this moment in time. But the interface between the ICS and the provider collaborative will be a really great one going forward because they will, in our thinking, be tasked with the delivery of the strategy that the integrated care system alights on. So we will be the work programme for that.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So ambulance trusts have historically worked across boundaries. You've talked about that a little bit earlier. Moving towards integration, what can other parts of health and social care learn from the way that your trust has worked, from the successes you've had in working across boundaries?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity to learn about efficiencies from the ambulance trusts. So the fact that we work as a 10 or a 13, depending on which month you're talking about, to drive out efficiencies through things like the model ambulance services, single specifications for big capital spend like vehicles, not building things where actually we could share resource or share facilities with other organisations. So that's not just from our ambulance trust, but we will share stations, for example, with fire service and police. So we're very capital hungry, I think, as an NHS, and there's much more that we could do to hone back on that hunger, so that money could potentially be reinvested. We've we've embraced technology, so all of our ambulances are kitted out really well with we use GTech as a component. Some ambulances are using iPads now. We have a care record, a Great North care record now available to us. So, you know, all of that maximising of efficiency and effectiveness within there. But so we talked about collaboratives before. We're all working in collaboratives. There's no mystery to them. They're just partnerships. So if you're working in partnership with somebody, it can only be 2 of you, or it can be 20 of you. You're working in a collaborative, is the reality. So the mental health trusts that work together are working in a collaborative. So we get hung up on the language, I think, a little bit, rather than thinking about actually in reality, it's just a group of people coming together with a common cause and a will to actually fix something or to develop something further. Or to transform, you know, something in the best interests of the collective, not necessarily just the individual. So, you know, we do that well across the acute ambulance chief execs and across the 10. We have shared, actually, we have a really great infrastructure. We have a managing director who looks after that. We have a core small team that we all contribute money to maintain that team. It's you know, set up as an arm's length. It influences out into the wider central government, you know, through NHS providers or NHS Confed. So all of that, I think, is something to be learned or picked up from what has been a very long-standing collaborative, although we don't call it that, across the ambulance sector.
Yeah, wonderful. One thing that you mentioned briefly there was sort of digital technology and innovation. Another hat that you wear is the digital transformation lead for the ICS. Forgive me if the terminology is slightly out there. Can you correct me on the terminology and just outline what that role entails? It's probably very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm the senior responsible officer. So for all of our different work programs, we have an allocated chief executive who supports that work stream. So I'm the senior responsible officer for digital for the ICS.
Yeah, and what does that role entail?
Yeah, so so we run the digital program as a consortia board. So we drew together a consortia board which is made up of providers and local authority representation and the current clinical commissioning group. We agreed probably 2.5 years ago, so before I was actually SRO, someone else was, we agreed a work programme that initially developed our Great North care record to make sure that we had that connectivity between primary care, community and secondary care for the core patient record. That is now up and running and interfaced in between all of the acute providers and rolling out now to local authority, which is really good. And we're looking to see how care homes could actually be involved and access that too. We are looking at the digital platforms and networks around radiology, pathology and haematology, so that we have a single approach, single preferred approach across the ICS for each of those areas. We also work very closely with the Academic Health Science Network to just draw in all of their experience. And the most recent piece of work that we are working through is how our trusted research environment might be established. So we know that data mining, data mining of NHS data is a huge thing that everybody would love to have their hands on. The real truth of the matter is the public do not trust that at this moment in time. So we can't really get people, well, we will now, because if if the way to get on your holidays is that you have to have the NHS app and you have to be able to show your 2 vaccines, I can guarantee millions of people will be downloading the NHS app who don't currently have it. And that will, I'm saying that a little bit facetiously, but actually that's a great route in for the NHS to start to develop that in a much greater way, because, you know, I mean, you know, we're the 5th largest employer, I think, in the world, the NHS, and therefore the data that we hold because of the activity that we generate it is phenomenal and could be really, I mean, it is used really well, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, we have some fantastic research going on, but there is a greater level of opportunity within there. So we're looking at the trusted research environment as one of our newer work streams within that digital frame. And we have obviously I said we have a consortia board, membership driven, and it's they all have a contribution. They all make a financial contribution to the infrastructure aligned to that, and it works. Yeah. It works really well, and some great work with there's you can access, I don't know what the website is by telling you, but there is, if you just Google in the Great North Care Record, if anybody's interested, there is a full website that gives you lots of information about the work that's going on, and will signpost people to the digital work as well. So, you know, have a look at that, and it'll give you far more detail than I could give you now, because I'd have to spend a couple of hours on it.
Thanks, Helen. We were having an internal conversation earlier, actually. Earlier this week, there was the publication of the data security document, and you know, enabling a lot of what you've just talked about, the shared records and patient or patient data for research. And just a reflection, I suppose, that piece around the COVID app. And actually, I think one of the challenges has always been, how do you convey to the patient the value of them sharing their data? And it's always been hard to do that because the immediate use case hasn't been there. It's always been a case of one day you might need someone to access it, or one day you might need a medicine that someone's off developing and it's taken away. Whereas actually that's probably a really good example. We were also talking about the shared care records and just trying to get our heads around that. So obviously the one that you've got is well down the road. How does that work? Does it sit on its own distinct system, or is it just data that's held centrally that can be accessed through GP systems, through hospital systems?
Now, you see, Tom, what you're asking me there is a technical question.
Is that where we Google? Is that where we Google it? Yeah, okay.
That's where you've mined me out in terms of that.
No problem. No problem.
So over here on my shoulder usually would be sitting someone who understands the tech.
Yeah, okay, no problem. We can go away and Google that, because I think, you know, for us, it's probably for everyone, it's kind of stepping into the future a little bit in terms of what's possible. And
for sure.
I suppose from that perspective, when you've got something like a Great North Care Record at your disposal, what difference does that make for you and your colleagues across the system in what you can do and how you can do it?
Yeah, so it's made a huge difference, certainly from our perspective and from the paramedics' perspective. You know, it's one of those things that the litmus test is. So we said, we're going to put all of this onto your system. They said, oh God, Helen, go away. We don't want another thing put on our system. We're absolutely sick to death of having to access everything. And so we said, no, you have to have it on your system. And then we put it on the system, and within 6 weeks, they said, don't ever take that off, mind. Don't take that off us. Because what it gives is that instant ability to, you know, obviously access patient's drug history, you know, what they are normally like. So if you're pitching up and you're seeing someone in respiratory distress with, you know, O2 sats of, you know, 92, which might indicate to a paramedic normally that patient needs to go to hospital, if that's their norm, and you can see that immediately on their Great North Care Record, and you can see that they've got emergency meds that you can initiate while you're there, and they've got a core case worker that is noted on there that you can drop a note to on that Great North Care record so that that patient gets a visit within 24 hours. You know, that's the difference that it can make, having those records available, because it's not just the record, it's the connectivity that it offers to the right person at the right time. Otherwise, the time that you spend, so I was talking about time on scene, the time that you'll spend on the telephone trying to find someone who can support that patient, if that ticks on too far, you will just get a lift of that patient and a transport to hospital so that they are safe, because the paramedics aren't, their job isn't to deal with that chronic disease episode necessarily. So, you know, that interface is great. It allows the GPs, of course, to see when a patient is admitted to hospital. It allows them to access the discharge notes. So notoriously, the big fights between hospitals and GPs is about, you know, the discharge that are not being sent and the patient rocking up and them saying, well, I don't know anything about this. Access to tests that would normally be difficult to get to. So it is transformational within the system. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, so I mean, whether it's happening or not at the moment, I'm not sure, but I can imagine that for that paramedic team, the mental health workers, whoever is going to see that person in their home or wherever they are, on the journey there, they can be looking at the notes and building that picture of who they're coming to see. So actually, when they arrive, it's okay, well, this is what we already know about you, therefore we understand the situation is likely to be either you know, a recurrent situation, or it's a one-off, and you know how they might manage it. So yeah, I can see how already you're saving 5 minutes or so of conversation when you get there, aren't you, of, you know, what medicines are you taking, all those sorts of things. Yeah, well, let's hope that it really takes off a pace as it promises to.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. So many of our audience are from healthcare industries of varying types. What can you tell them about the importance of ambulance trusts for them in trying to reach patients, support patients, whether it be devices, medicines, diagnostics? Yeah,
so I would say when you're wanting to interface with the ambulance trust, make sure you know your audience. It's really we're really very different, and I hope that that's come across a little bit in the discussion today. Think about if you want to be in connection with the ambulance service, think about what we really do, not what people think we do. And you know, do that bit of research. So I think when Tom and I were talking about me coming to do this, I was really quite blunt on a personal level and said, if I get a cold approach, even if I think that might be something interesting, that starts off with, can we help your hospital too? That will immediately go into my junk folder and I will block that sender. That is just how life works, because I probably get 10 or 15 of those contacts a day. But if that is tailor pitched well to me, then actually there's much more chance of us being engaged. I think I would also say from an ambulance perspective, being in contact with the bigger group of us in terms of the Acute Ambulance Collective is probably something that might be of interest to some people. And again, ACE have a website that people can connect into. Martin Flaherty is our managing director within them. We've got a small team who are working on digital platforms, etc., for us the whole time. So you know, there are different kind of routes in. And also you know, I'm probably preaching a bit to the converted and the things that you already do, but I always find it very helpful when we have that discussion through things like the NHS Confed or through NHS providers who have obviously a plethora of interests and are also always keen to
see some great case studies coming through. You know, when case studies are built, actually, I think that's what often builds the interest. It must have been really difficult, I think, for all of you with your connections to all of us in the last year, because we would normally connect at conferences and different things and be able to have that face-to-face conversation. And I suspect that has been really tough for a lot of people on the call today, Tom. Hopefully we'll be able to rebuild that. I know the last couple of things I picked up as innovation packages that I brought back and you know, eventually introduced in the organisation were picked up at conference where we could see things in place, because the time to pick up your emails and really read through them and say, oh, actually that would be of interest to us as a service is so limited. So, you know, I'm sure you'll all be, as I am, looking forward to getting back to that face-to-face contact where actually the imparting of the knowledge and the support that can be provided is much richer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all desperate to have a bit of a face-to-face time. We just got a couple of minutes ago, so we were talking the other day about collaboration and how to work together, and a lot of our audience will do that in particular ways, and it's around redesigning pathways and various things. And you told me about how you work collaboratively on designing ambulances. It's not something I'd ever thought of. Can you just give us a minute or two on kind of that process and how you work collaboratively doing that?
Yeah, so that came about from the model hospitals, not from model hospitals, from the Carter report. And in the Carter report, when they looked at the efficiencies in ambulances, because ambulances, the physical ambulances are our biggest capital spend as ambulance providers, and we all had different designs, different chassis, different manufacturers, different internals. So clearly that was inefficient, financially inefficient. So we worked together on designing a single specification for the ambulances that we will purchase. That was very painful because obviously people are wedded to the ambulance that they are currently in because they're used to it. And we have big box body vehicles, and the design that has been agreed is a van, which you'll see many other ambulance trusts using. So there's the purchase of the vehicle, then there's the conversion to a standard specification, and then there's the kitting out of the inside to a standard specification. So all of that was agreed between the 13 ambulance trusts, so we could progress that. But it took 2 years to get to the point where we all agreed on a single specification. And you know, in my trust, they will still be very disgruntled is a reality at the move from what they think is the Rolls-Royce of ambulances to what they feel is now, I think they call it the minivan or something of ambulances. But you know, there is a reality that, you know, we're part of the bigger NHS, and that reinvestment hopefully will go into frontline care in some shape or form. So that was a great piece of collaborative work.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Helen. We're just about out of time now. So yeah, thank you again for joining me today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you everybody at home for tuning in. We're obviously all still learning about what the future of the NHS might look like. Every month we have another conversation. Next month I will be exploring cancer, the future of cancer services, treatments, medicines in the NHS. So please join us for that. If you want to know any more about what we do, please drop us a line at nhsinsights@mtechaccess.co.uk. Follow our NHS Whispers page on LinkedIn. We do a whole load besides these webinars to support your market access strategy. We are back on July the 30th, so we'll see you then. And until then, look after yourself. Thanks very much again, Helen. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.